Hello again, HC Science students. We're looking today at Thursday, December 10th. And again, you're getting this video via Edpuzzle because you were not in class for whatever reason. Today we in class kind of finished up our classifying rocks and looked at the major rock groups, kind of getting ready for our classifying rocks quiz tomorrow. So I want to make sure we're ready for that. Again, it is open note. It does put you into lock mode. It'll be 6 rocks and 5 questions for each rock. So we'll talk about that in a second, what that looks like. So as we get into it here, we did finish up our notes. We were working on page 27. And kind of a review of where we've been. We looked at possible rock groups, color, size, texture, materials, shiny or not, striped or not. All of those sorts of things are things that we've talked about. And then earlier in the week, we went through and added, on Tuesday, we went through and added this grain size. And really, this is a comment on texture. So this is the different kinds of texture. They can be coarse-grained. They can be fine-grained texture. You can have a glassy texture and have no grains like obsidian and pumice. And of course, there's this unknown category, which is kind of a mix. And so we talked today the word for andesite, where it's got some coarse grain, some large chunky crystals, as well as some kind of set against that background of fine grained stuff. As for andesite, the word for that is porphyry, Porphyre. So andesite, it has a texture called porphyry, where it's got some large grains, so some coarse grains, as kind of mixed in with some fine grains. And that only applies to andesite and kind of the kind of rock that is. So the next thing we did was we got into our major rock groups. We started with igneous. Igneous rocks are formed from volcanoes when magma or lava is cooling. And again, kind of depending on how and where exactly the magma and lava is cooling depends on what will tell you what kind of rock it turns into. Rocks on this list: gabbro, diorite, granite, basalt, rhyolite, andesite, obsidian, and pumice. So make sure you've got that list in there. You know what those rocks look like. And then we kind of looked at those rocks for any patterns or key characteristics. And there really can be any texture. They can be coarse, like gabbro, diorite, and granite. They can be fine, like basalt or rhyolite. They can be porphyry, like andesite. And again, igneous rocks are the ones that can be porphyry. Or they can be glassy, like obsidian and pumice. So they can't really be any texture. But the color is important. They typically tend to be in the black and pink and whitish gray, oftentimes, mostly with sparkles in there, and those sparkly crystals. So that color is important in there as well. Okay, and then we moved on to sedimentary rocks. Sedimentary rocks are formed from other rocks. So when other rocks break down, so we talked about weathering, erosion, deposition, compaction, and cementation is the process of making a sedimentary rock. Weathering is when those rocks break down. Again, we looked at that with like glaciers and rivers. That's what breaks the rocks down. And then erosion is when it carries them away. So if a glacier or a river carries that sediment from one place to another, that's erosion. And then deposition is where it lands. So if a glacier drops it and it forms a came or a drumlin, or if a river drops it and it forms a delta or something like that, that's deposition. So these first 3 we're familiar with already. The last 2, compaction and cementation, are the new ones. Compaction basically takes what's there, like squishes it down, it compacts it, right? It packs down the earth or the sediments. And cementation is where it cements it. It like binds it together, glues it together. Okay. Rocks on this list: conglomerate, sandstone, shale, limestone, coal, and chalk. One of the things we talked about in here is that some of these rocks are formed explicitly from other rocks and go through this process. And so that's just bits of other rocks that are smushed together. Some of these rocks, like limestone, actually go through a chemical process. So when you've got a certain set of sediment combined with certain organic matter, it actually grows, and that's why limestone has to have those bits of shells and things like that is typically found in limestone. Others, like coal and chalk, are found from the little bits of those when sediment from inorganic matter combines with sediment from organic matter, dead plants, dead animals, bones, shells, those sorts of things that can all pile up, and they make these organic sorts of rocks. Key characteristics: they can be banded or non-banded. Banded would be where it's got like lines of sediment, visible lines, and it can be lines of color. It can also be lines of or like layers of sediment in there. So you can see like a shale, for example, is one color consistently throughout, but typically has layers, or often has layers in there as well. Last group was metamorphic rocks, and these are formed when other rocks are put under great heat and pressure. So heat and pressure, like a lot of pressure, like a mountain sitting on top of it, a lot of heat, like next to a volcano. Not enough heat to melt it and turn it into magma, but definitely enough heat to change things. So heat and pressure are what form these rocks. Again, more details on exactly where and how all of this happens. Rocks on this list, we have schist, gneiss, marble, and slate. And these rocks can be foliated or non-foliated. Foliated is kind of like banded. The difference is that the foliated applies only to metamorphic rocks. So if you took, for example, a piece of granite and put a lot of heat and pressure on it and squished it down, you get the nice lines that you have in gneiss. Or if you took shale and pressed it down and squished it even flatter, you would get slate. So that's metamorphic rocks, where the layers in slate are much finer, much thinner, but the color is still the same because it's the same minerals that are in there. So these are what we're looking at for our notes. So please make sure you get your notes all up to date. And in there, because of course you get to use your notes on the quiz tomorrow. So as we're looking at tomorrow's quiz, basically I'm going to give you 6 rocks, and you need to tell me, first of all, what's the name of the rock. Second, you need to tell me what the texture of the rock is. So look at it, decide, tell me what kind of texture does it have, what the grain size. Tell me which major rock group does it belong to, right? Is it igneous, sedimentary, or metamorphic? So those are kind of multiple choice. And then the last 2 questions, you need to tell me something about how that rock was probably formed, and describe the characteristics of that rock. So colors, textures, those sorts of things, banded or not, foliated or not, those would be things you want to put in that last question about describing the details of the rock. So if you have questions on what's on the quiz tomorrow, definitely let me know. Other reminders, beyond the quiz tomorrow, good time to look for the moon. So make sure you're filling in your moon log as you go. Is in the morning. Unfortunately, today was sort of cloudy. Tomorrow, hopefully, will be better. We'll see. But look for the moon in the morning is going to be your best bet. It's actually up for quite a good chunk of the day. Other interesting things to look for or not make observations of is we should have some pretty good aurora borealis, some pretty good northern lights last night, tonight, and maybe tomorrow. There was a pretty big solar storm earlier this week that's going to be causing those. It's very powerful, so that you can see northern lights, as far south as Nebraska and Omaha as well. So if you get a chance, get outside and look for those. Best time to look for the northern lights is going to be kind of in the early evening to up to around midnight or so. It tends to be more as we go through that sort of a phase. So look for those if you can. If you get outside of town, get away from the lights. It tends to be the best. Of course, that all assumes that it clears off. It's still pretty cloudy at the moment. So otherwise, if you have questions, please let me know. Otherwise, I look forward to seeing you tomorrow, and we'll knock out that classifying rocks quiz. Have a great day, folks.